Speaking of hot takes, I'm sure you'll have one from this. So this is from notthebee.com. A Vermont Christian High School's girls basketball team withdrew from their Division 4 state tournament last week rather than play against an opposing squad that has a 6'1" transgender player who dominates, guards the whole post, and just does not let anything come through the lane. The Mid Vermont Christian School Eagles voluntarily forfeited their playoff game in protest against their opponent, the Long Trail School Mountain Lions, who have the biological male on their team. Head of the school for MVCS, Vicky Fogg, had this to say about the team's decision. Quote, "We believe playing against an opponent with a biological male jeopardizes the fairness of the game and the safety of our players. Allowing biological males to participate in women's sports sets a bad precedent for the future of women's sports in general." End quote. Coach Courtney Stastny of the Mountain Lions has previously boasted about her transgender player, who at 6'1" is the tallest member of their team. Quote, "Rose brings such a great energy to the floor. We nicknamed her Rose, not in my house, Johnson, because she just does not let anything come through the lane." So that's the quick gist of the story there. But what are your initial thoughts on that, John?
And I know there's a little follow up to that because Mid Vermont Christian School was just ousted from Vermont Principals Association. And the fallout continues. I know this article from where is this from? BenningtonBanner.com saying the fallout continues after Mid Vermont Christian School's decision to withdraw their girls basketball team for playing a transgender opponent. Vermont Principals Association issued a letter to Mid Vermont Christian Schools on Monday afternoon stating that the private school is now ineligible to participate in VPA sanctioned activities effective immediately. And this is all based off them forfeiting that first round matchup against Long Trail. That's what happens. Like we're now at this point where a Christian school is saying we would much rather stick with the virtues and values that are supposed to be ingrained in sports than to try to compete against someone that creates an unfair environment. What's the beauty of sports? It's meritocracy. Sports should be a level playing field in the sense of every single person is the gender that they are. When I went to see Leah Thomas in the national championships, it was fascinating and depressing to see the reactions by both parents, coaches, and athletes. You get out there and you have a male competing against, and there's times where you just don't have a shot. So I love the decision not to play, especially when these women work so hard to get to the playoffs. And then what happens the first round? They have to play against a man. And I thought it was a great decision, but those decisions in our culture now come with major consequences. And it doesn't matter if you're a Christian school or not. It probably doesn't even help if you're a Christian school because they're like, yeah, you're hateful, you're bigoted, you're basing this off some old ancient text about what's accepting and loving. But the decision I thought was the right one. And the thing we have to do now is hit them where it hurts. This is happening from the top down. It's happening with the NCAA. It's happening in places like Vermont, where you have the Principals Association that are making these decisions and allowing these things. The LPGA is allowing some of this stuff. There's someone that's going through the process of trying to get their tour card, and it's a biological man. Like this, I don't know why the feminists are so silent. If you are all about women's rights and all about fairness and equality and everything that women before you have stood up for, why are you silent now? Because we're going to get to a point where, my truth is now trumps everything.
Yeah.
Everybody can get offended, they can feel oppressed, or they can call something hate speech just because it's based off their truth. Somebody
Yeah.
misgendered me. Someone didn't allow me to compete, even though I've gone through all the body mutilations and taken all the pills and gone through this whole process of testosterone blockers, and they're still not letting me compete. That's hateful, and I'm going to sue. That's what we're getting to. So like now is the time to fight back against this kind of stuff. um and there's a organization called Icons that people should look up as well. People like Riley Gaines, who competed
Mm.
against Leah Thomas. She was a Kentucker she was a swimmer at the University of Kentucky.
Yep.
She tied Leah Thomas for fifth in one of those events, and she's done an incredible job. Marcy Smith is another one who won a national championship years ago with the University of Arizona in swimming. There's a lot of work being done, but plain and simple, awards, opportunities, and fairness are just getting dismantled right now because of nonsense like this. But good for this school stepping up and saying, "Nah, we ain't gonna play this game."
Yeah. Absolutely. So last week, I'm just going to bring you into a conversation that my regular co-host Michael and I had last week, a little bit about Matt Walsh, because you've probably seen he got into Twitter trouble last week about whether or not he's too mean towards people like Dylan Mulvaney. I don't know if you saw any of the comments that he made, but
Yeah,
I'm sure you're
I
aware
did.
of either way, Matt Walsh and his general tone when speaking. And so, what's your take on how Christians should operate in terms of niceness to bluntness, blunt honesty ratio, as well as like your thoughts on whether or not Matt Walsh went too far? Because Michael is an incredible co-host, and one of the things that he brings that's kind of unique to the show is that Michael doesn't follow the news because he's so busy with his seminary degree that was like we basically gave him the initial statement by Walsh, followed by criticisms, followed by Walsh responding to criticisms, and that whole conversation was him just processing whether or not that was too far or not. So I love your take on that.
Well, I think I'll probably start with this. Matt Walsh is not a Christian; he's a Roman Catholic.
Right.
So I don't really think it changes how we should act as human beings. Um, but I think specifically us as Christians, I know I can be seen at times as someone that, you know, isn't as loving as they should be. I think sometimes I'm very blunt, and I can appreciate Matt Walsh's bluntness at times. But I mean, I can come out and say that like there's no such thing as bisexuals. All you guys are just depraved horn dogs. And somebody would be like, that's hateful. I'd be like, well, I believe that's the truth. Um, but if we're going to look at someone like Dylan Mulvaney, which should break our heart,
Right.
um, and I think it breaks our heart because it breaks God's heart, because you have
Mm.
someone that's living in not just a delusion, but they are outwardly showing that delusion that's on the inside. And I think we should always be praying for these people. So, like, no matter what political side of the aisle you find yourself on, you should be praying for people in leadership. We should be praying for people like Dylan Mulvaney. But at the same time, too, I don't think there's any problem with calling this stuff out in a blunt way. If you're going to attack, um, because I know that's where like I can't get to a specific. It's either good or bad, and I don't know if that's even the right way to go about it, because that's what
Right.
people have said with Matt Walsh is, well, if you don't like the way I've gone about it, you just want me to be soft. And like maybe it's not as simple as that.
Mm.
Maybe there's a sense of we need to be strong without doing a major attack on the inward parts of this person.
Right.
Um, we can, with situations like Hershey's, we can go after Hershey's. When we have the Mid Vermont Christian School dropping out, we need to go after the Principals Association. When Leah Thomas is allowed to compete in the national championships, we need to go after the NCAA. So I think there's times where we're fighting
Picking
on
the
the
right
wrong
target.
hill. Yeah, and that doesn't mean, because people like Dylan Mulvaney are twisted, depraved people that are manipulating so many young people right now. And then
Right.
obviously that goes to it goes to the next part where, like, okay, if you're a parent of this child, why are you allowing them to digest this kind of content
Right.
consistently? There, and again, I don't know what it's like to be a parent, so I can't give specific parenting advice, but I think that's what it gets to. Someone like Matt Walsh, that I wish they'd take the next step. It's just you know, who is Dylan Mulvaney's parents?
Mm.
How did it get to this place? But there is nothing wrong with bluntness, but I think if we're starting to attack the inmost part of these people's beings, we're fighting on the wrong hill, and we
Right.
start to become like bullies, and we're not getting to the root of the problem. And someone like
Right.
Matt Walsh, I appreciate him very much. Um, I've met him a couple times before. I don't think you'd remember those meetings, uh, but he's always been a kind person that, welcomes debate anytime that he goes to a school or any event. But I think we have to realize there's times where I even need to look at myself and be like, okay, I have a Bible study group that I have, a good accountability partners, and that's what we should have as Christians, people that could call us out, to be like, yes, that was truth. But, you know, it doesn't just make me feel uncomfortable seeing you as a friend post that stuff. I don't know if that's really loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
Giving the truth is loving, no doubt.
Yeah.
But the way that you present it, and I know my girlfriend's been fantastic at this, because she's like, "Hey, from my perspective here, I would never want to have the platform you have, but think about how this is received. Take an extra
Right.
breath, and don't just try to hammer in on a point that obviously is going to get some people triggered online. Take a step
Right.
back and think about, let's remind people scripturally why this is wrong. Let's remind people that Christians don't hate you. We just love you enough to not lie to you or stay silent um, when you're freely tearing apart your life and allowing other people to push you into that delusion.
Yeah. The door swings both ways. There are times when I think we need accountability to push us to be more confrontational, because I think we live in a culture that, if I was to pick one, we're too non-confrontational. We're much closer to that extreme than we are to the extreme of being too mean. But
Yeah.
obviously there is such thing as too mean. And so it's just finding that balance. I've really chalked it up, in my understanding, is when it comes to at least the movement, the conservative movement, you know, e- everyone who has a tool belt needs a hammer.
Yep.
And the way Walsh approaches things, he is a hammer.
Yep.
And the reality is, to someone who's maybe more designed to be, measuring tape, the way that the hammer operates is going to be incredibly uncomfortable to witness when you are measuring tape, because you are not built to be a hammer. And that's just the way I've come to terms with it. But I want to
What I
go
would
ahead
say to
and,
that,
yeah, go
real
ahead.
quick, sorry to cut you off, is um, there are times where we beat people over the head with the Bible, where it's like, I just can't believe you don't get this. Like, it's, I know I was reading over Proverbs 13 today. That's the classic spare the rod, spoil the child. Like, you don't spank a child, and I didn't get spanked as a child and not told, why this is wrong.
Mm,
And if that chastising is done just out of anger or out of selfish ambition, the lesson is not going to be learned. So there is times too that people need to understand, as Christians, we will be talking about absolute truth. It is an absolute truth that we were born male and female. God doesn't make mistakes.
right.
But if we give you scripture, we are not beating you over the head with scripture. If you have a problem, let's get down to an absolute truth. But that's where a lot of people are missing it. They don't believe in absolute truth. They
Yep.
believe in their truth. So that's what it comes down to too. If we are going to make these strong, bold statements, We need to back it up, and this is why we believe this, not just because we had somebody throw some verbal fiery darts at us.
Right.
Here's the reason why we believe what we believe, and this is the reason that we have the hope that we have. 1 Peter 3:15.
Of course. Yeah. And of course, discernment to know that we shouldn't bring up everything to everyone.
Mhm.
Not everything needs to be a public debate. Some things you need to only approach someone when you have a relationship strong enough to withstand the weight of that conversation.